Welcome to MidPoint. I'm Seán, I'm the host of MidPoint Monday. Today we'll take your calls about water, the health of the Hillsborough River, and a plan to pump water out of a sinkhole called the Morris Bridge Sink. My guest is from Friends of the River. We'd like your input, so here's how you can join the conversation. The number is 813-239-9663. You can also email your question or comment to dj@wmnf.org. You can text us at 813-433-0885. If you call now, you'll be the first on the air. Before we begin, we have two listener comments about our recent shows. We'll hear someone commenting about our show on the history of the Johns Committee. That was a Cold War era group that also cracked down on gay and lesbian state employees, including professors at universities. We'll also hear from a listener commenting about our show last week, where we played an excerpt from Donald Trump's speech in Sarasota.
Mike in Tampa, and I've called Donald Trump a racist and a fascist and everything else, and I still call him that. But I absolutely will not vote for Hillary Clinton, even if Trump's the nominee. I can't stand her, and I will not vote for any Clinton. And right now, as things stand right now, I plan to vote for Joe Seán.
Hi, Seán. This is Lori. I am just responding to your topic 2 weeks ago, which was on the Johns Committee. I think it's important to remind people how discriminating people can be when they fear what they don't understand. It's unfortunate and cruel, plus it's even more of an impact when committees are formed by so-called authorities. Children trust authorities and believe what they say must be true. Sometimes they question such accusations, but many kids do not, leaving them completely confused as to how they should perceive people who might be different from them.
I probably won't play that today, but if near the end of the show, like 15 minutes till the end of the show, if I decide to, I'll just start talking about that.
We can learn from one another, and thank goodness for diversity. Life would be incredibly boring without it. People need to learn how to research for themselves from more than just one or two sources before deciding whether or not to persecute others. Thankful.
Those are two listeners commenting about our last two shows. Later in the broadcast, I'll give out the number for you to leave a voicemail. You can always comment on the stories on our website, wmnf.org/news. You can also join the conversation on Twitter or Facebook at WMNF News. Today our topic is the health of the Hillsborough River. The Southwest Florida Water Management District, or SWIFMUD, has asked the Florida Department of Environmental Protection for permission to pump up to about 4 million gallons of water per day from a sinkhole near Thanota, Sassa, in order to help the health of the lower Hillsborough River. My guest in the studio today is from Friends of the River. Rich Brown is also chair of the Planning Commission's Technical Advisory Committee for the river that makes recommendations to the River Board. Welcome to WMNF's MidPoint, Rich.
Sean, it's a delight to be here.
Well, let's start by talking about the health of the river. We have a lot of information we're going to get to, and we'll talk about it all, and we'll have input from our listeners as well. But why are we concerned about how much water is flowing to the lower Hillsborough River?
We're concerned about that because the lower river, and it's difficult to talk about the lower river, the middle river, the upper river. The entire watershed is all interconnected. But to get back to the specifics of the lower river, huge number of schools, people live there. It's the water's gateway to downtown and the Riverwalk. So back in the 70s, and some of the listeners can remember the great river raft stuff, where there was often no water put over the dam at all because of water demands of the City of Tampa's water plant. And what happens then is the lower river turned into really a one-way stagnant ditch. And people would get in there, come out with skin problems that smelled bad. You could watch the same tire float up and down with the tide. It lost all its value, both for humans. And it's right beneath the dam, down to about Hannah's Whirl, a mile or so. There's an area that's an estuary for everything from mammals like manatees to a lot of the fish that wind up in the bay, either as sports fish or food for the sport fish that spawn there. Many fish species require a certain amount of time in an almost freshwater place during their juvenile stage. So that was lost, and that affected the whole bay.
Let me back up a little bit. I should have asked you maybe first about the dam. So there is a dam that's at Rolett Park, which is between, maybe central Tampa, between Sulphur Springs, Seminole Heights area, and Temple Terrace.
Right, most people can think of Rowlett Park if you come off the western edge of Busch Gardens. It's about a half mile right down that street, which is 30th or Bruce B. Downs. It's a lovely park. Rowlett's a wonderful park. You can fish, rent a kiosk for your party. Kids run around. They've got a jogging path. It's super. And the dam is currently there. This is the third dam. The dams were, the first dam was back in the 1800s, built for flood control, and that was closer to Temple Terrace. Where the dam is now, the second dam was built, and that was actually in part to provide electrical power for the trolley company. The trolley that went as far south as Ballast Point and up to Sulphur Springs, because Sulphur Springs back then was a major tourist destination for the nation, really. So it was, huge generators, but that dam failed during a big storm, and the dam that's currently built is pretty rock solid. It's a big dam, and it does not generate any more electricity. It is mostly for flood control, and the reservoir behind the dam is where the city of Tampa draws water that goes into their water treatment plant that's just south of the Rogers Park Golf Course. And then the city of Tampa sells that water.
So if you're driving down, let's say 56th, and you see this wide Hillsborough River, that's what it looks like above the dam. And then if you cross, let's say 275 or Florida or Nebraska, if you cross the river there, you'll notice a very small stream of a river almost in some places.
Right. The river that's Rowlett Park Drive, which is just on the west side of Rogers Park Golf Course, the river that goes under there is probably no more than 40 yards wide. So the huge thing you see at Rowlett Park and back up into Temple Terrace really narrows out.
The ecology of the river, of course, above the dam, completely freshwater.
Right.
Below the dam is freshwater / estuarine.
Well, it's freshwater for about a half mile, and that's when we have flow, about a half mile downstream, and then estuarine down to about Hannah's World. The goal was to provide fresh water, and the word is towards Sulphur Springs. It doesn't get all the way there, but then Sulphur Springs puts out a fair amount of water itself. So really from about Lowry Park up, the dam, the river is much, much more healthy than it was back in the 70s, much.
And I hear from people who live along the river or recreate along the river, they see manatees, they see all sorts of wildlife, and the purpose of this conversation is that people are trying to figure out what's the best way to keep it healthy or get it healthier.
Right, there are competing demands for almost every drop of water in all of West Central Florida. And the macro picture is that huge picture where Tampa Bay Water is the drinking water supplier. The medium level picture is the city of Tampa with its own water plant at Rowlett Park and the health of the river. And then we'll eventually get to the micro part, which is Blue Sink, Sulphur Springs, the Bypass Canal, and then Morris Bridge Sink especially. So it's hard to talk about one single variable. This is a huge equation, but every variable counts. So it's worth dealing with something when it comes up, which is what we're doing.
Yeah, and if we didn't have to worry about drinking water, it probably would, the equation would be a lot simpler. Just how much water would we have to release over the dam, let's say,
Right.
to keep the water of the Hillsborough River at minimum flow levels. And there's a calculated or agreed upon minimum flow level. And how was that number reached? And tell us a little bit about that.
Originally, that number was an educated guess, and then about 5 years of science, gathering data on amount of water that went over the dam, and how the health of the river went. And what it appears based on that 5-year study is you get a very nice improvement in the health of the river at 20 to 25 cubic feet per second. You think of a cubic foot, maybe put 2 milk cartons together, that's about a cubic foot. So 20 to 25 of those going, and we say over the dam, sometimes it's through the dam, around the dam, but for here we'll say over the dam. 20 to 25 of those, science shows, does a nice job. So the agreed upon level right now, and looks like this will hold for quite a while, is 20 cubic feet per second for 9 months out of the year. And then April, May, June, which is the spawning season for a lot of fish, it goes up to 24 cubic feet per second. And that seems to be working a reasonably good compromise, which is good. That's about as good as you get, is a reasonably good compromise, and everybody seems reasonably okay with that.
So I mentioned manatees, they're easy for people to spot, but what about if you haven't been swimming or snorkeling or canoeing in the lower river, what else would be there that people might not know about?
Tremendous amount of birds, from ducks to the wading birds. In fact, while it's not a minimum flow, the times that a lot of water comes over the dam, when there's been a lot of rain upstream, you can sometimes at the base of the dam, you can see about 50 birds there in the shallows feasting on the fish that come with the water that's going over the dam. So you have birds, you have crabs, all of the stuff that live on the bottom. Manatees live there year-round now, and one of the reasons is, and most people don't think of it, manatee as a mammal, it breathes, okay, no problem, there you go, surface the water, but it also has to drink fresh water. It can't use gills like a fish, and so having that fresh water is a tremendous source. And manatees love it. Sulphur Springs also has fresh enough water that manatee like that. Alligators, which scares the kayakers. And what's important is, going back to the fish, the single largest food source for most of the sport fish in all of Tampa Bay is the bay anchovy, a little thing. And those spawn up there in humongous numbers. And that's almost the bottom of the food pyramid. When you get a fair amount of water, like has been recently, it's been a fairly wet late summer, fall. In fact, last night, I see the river multiple times a day. Some of the predator fish, like the jack, come up, trap the mullet against the side of a boat, and just have a feast. So you can tell when the river's active because the fish are active, the birds are active. The gators and the manatees kind of pay no attention to it, but that's good stuff. We even saw for the first time this week, below the dam, we saw an otter, and haven't seen that in ages. That's a real good sign of river health.
I've heard about the otters there, but I haven't seen any myself. So my guest is Rich Brown with Friends of the Hillsborough River. I'm Seán, the host of MidPoint Monday. It's 12:18 in the afternoon. You're listening to MidPoint on 88.5 FM, WMNF Tampa. And Rich, you're also the chair of the Planning Commission's Technical Advisory Committee for the river that makes recommendations to the River Board. There's a representative each from Temple Terrace, Tampa City Council, and Hillsborough Board of County Commissioners. Did I get all that right, first of all? And second of all, what does the River Board do?
You got it mostly right, and far more than most people. One of the things that we have in Hillsborough County and the Hillsborough River, which when I talk to other water-interested citizens and activists around the state, they are insanely jealous of, is we have the Environmental Protection Commission, which is formally it's the county commission. They just change hats into the Environmental Protection Commission. They have an entire staff that does elegant work. They have a new director, Janet Doherty, and they keep an eye out for all of Hillsborough County. The River Board, which is not directly part of that, which is part of the Hillsborough County Planning Commission, has the mandate to make sure that the master plan for the river, and there is a master plan for the river which deals with everything from ecology to development, that the master plan of the river is being watched. And those are the three people that you just mentioned, Commissioner Al Higginbotham from the County Commission, Councilwoman Lisa Monteleone from the Tampa City Council, and Councilman Grant Renby from Temple Terrace City Council are the three current members. They have working for them what we call the TAC, the Technical Advisory Council, which has a citizen representative from Hillsborough, Temple Terrace, and Tampa, plus representatives from the City of Tampa, City of Temple Terrace, Hillsborough County, Corps of Engineers, Regional Planning Council, Department of Environmental Protection, and SwiftMud, and EPC. That's a tremendous amount of talent sitting around meeting every month, looking at what's going on with the river and then advising the river board. So that doesn't exist elsewhere. We in Hillsborough County are tremendously fortunate to have those many eyes looking out after the river and the whole county.
So the reason that we're having this discussion right now is, we're always thinking about the river, but there's a specific issue that's come up about this place called the sink, and
Morrisbridge
Sink, right?
Right.
And so the SwiftMud has asked the Department of Environmental Protection, the State
Right.
Environmental DEP, to be able to pump from Morrisbridge Sink, pump water, and it says sink because it's a filled up sinkhole, right?
Yeah.
So from this sinkhole that's filled with water, to take the water from that and pump it into the lower Hillsborough to help with the minimum flow, directly or indirectly pumping it into the lower Hillsborough.
Right, where this came from is back when we were talking about the minimum flows at the river. Now, minimum flows are a federal standard, and any body of water that's a bona fide body of water has to have minimum flows, and that keeps it functioning as an estuary, as a viable body of water. So what had happened was there were no minimum flows set for the lower Hillsborough, and as we talked earlier, it's when it turned into that one-way ditch. So the minimum flows were set, but there was concern, primarily from the city of Tampa, but SwiftMud was also concerned that, wow, okay, there is now going to be water going over the dam. Originally it was 10 cubic feet, now it's the 2024 that we explained earlier. And the city of Tampa says that's where we get the water that we turn into potable water. And I'm a city of Tampa resident. I like being able to turn on the tap and potable water comes out. But it's also a revenue source for the city of Tampa. They didn't want to give that up. And as a taxpayer, yes, I want the city to be viable. But, okay, we're going to put 20 cubic feet over the dam. Where's that going to come from? Because the city said, I don't want it to come out of our potable water supply. So the City of Tampa, SwiftMud, Tampa Bay Water sort of got together and came up with a strategy. It's called a recovery strategy. How are we going to recover that 20 CFS? And the recovery strategy has 4 parts. One was to redo and upgrade the whole area of Sulphur Springs. If you've seen Sulphur Springs, when you cross the river on Nebraska Avenue, it's a beautiful pool. They've got a kiddie pool, they've got a lap pool for adults, they've got a picnic area. It's a lovely place right in the middle of town. So water from that is now being pumped in a pipe that runs along the river from Sulphur Springs up to the base of the dam. It doesn't put any more water in the river, it just changes it from going in at Sulphur Springs up to the base of the dam. But that meets the minimum flow requirement partially. And that was number 1. That's been done and that's operating. And in fact, we're actually getting more water out of Sulphur Springs than we thought. We're getting up to 18 on a good day, 18 cubic feet per second. And if you're looking at 2024, at 18, you're almost there. Yeah. Next in the line was Blue Sink. Blue Sink is up just west of Florida Avenue and just a little bit south of Fowler. So you can think of that. It's in the Forest Hills residential area, all the car dealerships and light industry that go up Florida. That's a sink there. If you go from there to the north, what happens is you wind up in Lake Magdalene and all that entire area there. The times you can remember flying out of Tampa International Airport going north, you look down and there's nothing but water and lakes and ponds and all that. That whole area that's now kind of Forest Hills was just a way for water to flow down towards the river. It's over aquifer, which means there's all kinds of tunnels and channels in that area. In fact, it's almost kind of built on Swiss cheese, as frankly most of Florida is. So that area had a couple of sinks, Blue Sink being one of them, and just immediately north, about 100 yards, is Iwanoski Spring. And in the past, water has been pumped out of Blue Sink to make up for emergency during drought. And while Blue Sink itself is now plugged with debris and garbage, the water still flows down from Lake Magdalene and that whole area And so the blue sink, there will be a pump there, and it'll be pumped from there down to, it will meet the pipe that comes out of Sulphur Springs in Seminole Heights, in Sulphur Springs, the residential area. And that will also be carried at times up to the base of the dam.
And we'll talk maybe more about Blue Sink and whether
Right.
that's a good idea
Sure.
later on in the show. We're getting to the Morris Bridge, which is
Right.
is that the fourth or the third?
Morris Bridge is fourth. So,
Mhm.
so first was Sulphur Springs, second was Blue Sink, third is the Tampa Bypass Canal. Now, if you are living in the west of the city of Tampa, the only time you see the bypass canal usually is when you cross it on I-4. And that's just when you leave downtown and you sort of come off of the overpass that runs high through Ybor City, and you come down and you cross this big flat canal-looking thing. Well, that goes to the south, it goes down to the Palm River and empties into there, and to the north, it goes all the way up to Trout Creek. And that's the Tampa Bypass Canal. That was constructed by the Corps of Engineers after Hurricane Donna, where a lot of the river area for the middle of Tampa flooded, and a lot of the area flooded anyway, tremendous rains. And so that was built then, and it is built as a shock absorber for flooding. As it turns out, we have not had another storm like Donna, thank you very much. And what it serves as now is largely a reservoir and a buffer for potable water. When the bypass canal was dug, it's unclear if it was by accident or on purpose, depends on who you talk to, the aquifer was breached, and now millions of gallons a day come up from the aquifer into the bypass canal. So the bypass canal is a tremendous source of water for both Tampa Bay water, which has a huge pipe in there and can pull water and pull it up to the Bill Young Reservoir, and from the city of Tampa, there's a connector from the bypass canal to the river up just kind of south of Temple Terrace. It's called the Harney Canal, and water can be moved back and forth from the river to the bypass canal. So the bypass canal was third, but it turns out the bypass canal has a heck of a lot of water, and between the bypass canal and Sulphur Springs, we're meeting the minimum flows the vast majority of days now without the first drop from Blue Sink or Morris Bridge Sink, and there's even more water available in the bypass canal.
And that water that's available in the bypass canal, if it doesn't get pulled out by Tampa Bay Water or by the city of Tampa, or if it doesn't get diverted to the lower Hillsborough, essentially, I don't want to use the word wasted, but essentially it just gets dumped into Tampa Bay, and that fresh water is gone.
Well, the fresh water's gone. It does help the Palm River. That's nice there, because they have some of the same one-way concerns that the lower river has. But yes, and actually there is not a minimum flow at the end of the bypass canal, so the bypass canal water is pretty much available on a regular basis to Tampa Bay Water and then into the river for use by the City of Tampa Water Department.
And so that brings us to the fourth option, which is the one that's being considered now, and that is the Morris Bridge Sink.
Right.
And what I've heard you say is that based on the amount of water that's available in the bypass canal and the amount of water that's available from Sulphur Springs, that's plenty most of the time. And this development here, this tapping of this sink might not be necessary. Is that accurate? And give us an idea of where this is, Synthenoda Sassa area maybe, and what the ecology of that area is like.
Okay, the Morris Bridge Sink, for those of you that have been up to the Trout Creek recreational area, and what you do there is you go out Fletcher Avenue going east, and you'll pass you'll across the river by Lettuce Lake, you'll see the University of South Florida recreation area. You keep going, go under the interstate, and right after that, off to the north, is the Trout Creek recreational area, and just a little further up from that, Morris Bridge Road heads east-west again, but that's where Blue Sink is. Off to the right-hand side is mostly the lower Hillsborough Wilderness Preserve. That's land owned by Swiftmud. It's a wilderness preserve, so it's probably 3/4 mile east of where Fletcher Avenue crosses the interstate. It is in a pristine area. Because it is a wilderness preserve, the only people allowed back in there are hikers and bikers. So it's a very nice area. There's another sink that's in there, a smaller one. There's a Cowhouse Creek, which is a historical way the water moved east-west. And there's about 68 acres of wetland. So it's a very lovely area. I was there this weekend. Bikers, hikers. It's a nice place to take your dog for a walk. We were jogging and walking. It's just lovely to put an industrial pump with whatever chain link fence and either wires overhead or a diesel generator. And then there's a pipeline that has to be built from there about a mile southwest to the top of the bypass canal. That is a big industrial effort that is going to cause damage not only to the environment because it's there and it's being used, it's also going to mess up the recreation of the whole area. So it's out in that area, and the amount of water that is to be permitted from there will be an annual average of 2 million gallons a day, with a maximum daily or a maximum monthly of 3.9, almost 4 million gallons a day. Our position as Friends of the River, and I'll go back for a second and say, when the minimum flows were originally being considered for the lower river back in 1999, they were looking at 10 cubic feet per second, and that was not a scientific-based thing. That's when Friends of the River formed, actually, and we wound up suing SwiftMud and saying, you have to go to science and figure out a scientifically based amount for that. And so Friends of the River has been involved since 1999, and so we have the standing to speak up and say, we've been watching, many good things have happened. They really have. We are mostly a partner with SwiftMud and talk to Tampa Bay Water, talk to EPC. So it goes well most of the time, but in this case, SwiftMud is doing what they're supposed to do. Morris Bridge Sink was the fourth on the recovery strategy, and they were supposed to ask for a permit. And the water permitting body in West Central Florida is SwiftMud, but you can't permit your own. So they have to go to DEP in Tallahassee and ask. And they did, and that's when we stood up and said, there are two reasons why Morris Bridge is not required. One, in the 17 years almost since this began, a lot has changed hydrologically in the area. So what made sense 17 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, doesn't make sense anymore. So we don't really need that amount of water out of there, and the ecological damage is not worth the water. So those are the two major points where we have been leading a community-wide effort. We'll get into that in a minute. Community-wide effort to ask SwiftMud not to request the permit. Well, that didn't work, unfortunately. They did request the permits. They went up to DEP, and we've mounted a large campaign to ask DEP not to issue the permit.
And if I can interrupt
sure.
you, last week the Tampa Bay Times editorialized that this shouldn't happen, that the
Yes.
DEP should reject the Morris Bridge Sink proposal